The sound of the alarm clock cut through the morning silence with its annoying sharp beeping. Cliff opened his eyes, trying to suppress an irritated groan. It seemed like he had just touched the pillow half an hour ago, but the clock already showed 7 a.m. What a mystery! Lately, as a decent young parent, he hadn't been getting enough sleep. Nights were dedicated to his 6-month-old child, Oliver. He and his wife were constantly jumping up at the sound of the calling cry from the crib, reminiscent of a siren's wail. But now the apartment was quiet. The child and his wife were still sleeping. Cliff carefully kissed Kendall on the forehead, and then got out of the warm blanket. Unable to rest, he tiptoed to the crib first thing and looked inside. The tiny boy was snoring, his fist nestled under his chubby cheek. Cliff couldn't help but smile. The child was long awaited in their family. The man couldn't be happier about becoming a father, and when people told him that the boy was his spitting image, he would dissolve into a satisfied smile. Such things as children's whims, sleepless nights, or dirty diapers seemed like nothing to him. He worked hard, but tried to help his wife with these responsibilities. The man enjoyed playing with his son, bathing him and pushing the stroller for hours along the streets on weekends, just to make sure his son slept in the fresh air. The workday on Monday didn't go well for Cliff, who worked in the field of water purification. There were problems with the delivery of materials, which meant that work at enterprises had to be suspended. Naturally, clients were dissatisfied, and it was up to Cliff to speak with them. By the end of the day, the man dreamed of returning home and hugging his son as soon as possible. But sad surprises in his life were just beginning. When he was stuck in evening traffic on his way home, his wife called on his smartphone. "Hi, Kendall," answered the husband, trying to hold the phone and make a turn at the same time. "Will you come home soon?" his wife asked, her nervousness evident in her voice. The man frowned. What if something had happened to their son? "The city is jam-packed, but I'll be there in 40 minutes for sure," he promised. "Did something happen?" "No," she hurried to reassure her husband. "Everything is fine. Don't hurry." After that, Kendall hung up. The conversation seemed strange to Cliff. Despite his wife's request not to hurry, he hastened home. To his great surprise, he didn't find his wife at home. Their son was sleeping in the crib, but his mother wasn't there. Deciding that she might have gone down to the neighbor, he went to the kitchen to have dinner. But instead of dinner, a note attached to one of the magnets on the refrigerator was waiting for him. His wife wrote, rushing. The text was barely legible, and it took him several attempts to understand its essence. He simply couldn't believe his eyes. "Forgive me, Cliff. I can't stay with you and our son. Circumstances have arisen. Tell our son that I love him." Of course, the man thought it was a prank. He started calling Kendall, and then her acquaintances, but to no avail. She disappeared. Thus began the new life of Cliff and his son Oliver. Raising a child was difficult, and it was not getting any easier with time. Although numerous blogs that he scoured searching for answers to his questions asserted that it was about to get a little easier. When the baby starts to eat, you will be easier. When the baby takes his first steps, you'll be easier. When he goes to school, you'll be easier. Now Cliff could answer all such statements categorically. No, there was nothing easy about parenting. Each year brought its own difficulties. At first, the man had to work with the child in his arms, while delving into issues of infant feeding. The child sometimes got sick, things got confused, and Cliff's head spun. Then he made a daily schedule of tasks, and in a few months, learned to handle the responsibilities skillfully. During this time, Kendall had only sent one message, the divorce papers. But she refused custody. Without feeling any pity, Cliff signed the necessary papers and forgot about the woman forever. When Oliver became a schoolboy, his father had to not only deal with the crisis of adulthood, but also attended parent-teacher meetings. He felt like a black sheep among the army of moms. However, all these difficulties did not prevent the father and son from living a happy life. Cliff raised a kind and responsive boy, who could stand up for himself and for the weaker ones. Oliver went to karate and swimming from the age of 4. He was healthy and a real source of pride for Cliff. The fact that Kendall once existed in their lives was forgotten. Even Oliver, having asked a couple of questions about his mother and childhood, also stopped thinking about her. Only Kendall herself reminded them of her existence when Oliver turned 18. Oliver was supposed to celebrate with friends at a country house on the weekend. They had rented it. On Tuesday, on his birthday, he and his father gathered for a family dinner, which they planned to finish with a festive cake. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The men glanced at each other. Are you expecting guests? Cliff smiled. Well, actually, no. Everyone already congratulated me. Maybe Ruby. Oliver responded and went to open the door. There was a woman he didn't know on the doorstep. The birthday boy looked at the guest in surprise. Hello, he said politely. Oliver, dear. The woman immediately said, and her voice trembled. Oliver, my boy, how you've grown. She rushed to the astonished Oliver, hugging him tightly. The young man was stunned, stepped back, not understanding what was happening. Cliff saw this scene as he came out of the kitchen. Kendall, he squeezed out sharply. What the hell are you doing here? After half an hour of tears and lamentations from Kendall, the trio sat down in the kitchen. The birthday cake was untouched in the center of the table. A year ago, I became a widow, Kendall began. My husband was fabulously rich, and he left me everything, including his construction company. But it's hard to run the company alone. I need an assistant. Why do you need us? Asked Cliff, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. You see, I can't trust anyone, explained Kendall. Everyone in the company dreams of taking my place, and I decided that I can bring in my own son, and then all the inheritance will go to Oliver. I have no children or heirs. Only you, Oliver. We could leave here for the capital, where you will have many prospects. The woman looked hopefully at her son, while Oliver looked hesitantly at his father, noticing how the man's face turned red and then covered with white spots. You know what, Kendall? Get out of here and go back where you came from. Cliff growled, barely containing his rage. I raised my boy for 18 years, and now you come and say that it will be better for him with you? You're insane. Do you even know that he has his own life? He just got into university. He has a girlfriend with whom they have serious relationships. Although, how would you know? Seeing his father's condition, Oliver tried to calm him down by putting his hand on his shoulder. Then he shyly looked at his mother. I'm sorry, but Dad is right. I don't even know you. He shook his head. I have other plans for my life and I won't abandon Dad, just as he didn't abandon me, unlike you. Kendall tried to convince her son, but he was adamant. Eventually, she left with nothing. However, 2 weeks later, when Cliff returned home, he had a strong sense of déjà vu. The apartment was empty, there was dead silence, and there was a note on the fridge. Dad, this is my chance and I can't miss it. I have no warm feelings for my mother, but I feel that I can achieve more in the city. As soon as I'm on my feet, I'll come back and I'll be able to help you. You won't need anything. I'm sorry I'm running away like this, but you wouldn't understand me and wouldn't let me go. Don't look for me, but know that I love you. The man took a step towards the stool to collapse on it, as his legs weakened. He held the note in his trembling hand, feeling the pain spreading in his chest. At that moment the doorbell rang. Deciding that it was Oliver, who had come to his senses, Cliff rushed to open the door, despite the growing fire in his chest. But on the threshold was Ruby, Oliver's girlfriend. Hello. The blonde smiled briefly. Is Oliver home? His phone isn't answering. The man found no strength to explain anything. He silently handed the crushed note to the girl, and then a particularly sharp pain pierced his heart, and groaning, Cliff grabbed his chest. Oh my God, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? Ruby rushed to the man who collapsed on the floor, but he could no longer answer. The girl immediately called an ambulance, but they couldn't save the man. It seemed that his heart simply couldn't withstand the second betrayal. Ruby buried him very modestly. Unable to find any other solution, she took some money from the deceased's apartment to pay for the burial, because she had no savings of her own. She hoped that Oliver would come to his father's funeral, but he never showed up. 7 years passed since Oliver's escape and Cliff's funeral. As promised, Oliver not only got back on his feet, but also achieved unprecedented success. He returned to his father as a winner and dreamed of telling him about it. Moreover, he hoped to take his dad with him, show him the capital in a different life. But the apartment greeted him with silence and dust. as if no one had lived there for a very long time. Dumbfounded, Oliver decided to visit his ex-girlfriend, who lived in the next entrance. Ruby opened the door immediately, and Oliver realized that she had not changed at all. Beautiful, with short light hair and naive blue eyes. "Hi," he smiled, feeling awkward. "Oliver." The girl's eyes widened. "But where did you come from?" "May I come in?" he asked, nodding towards the apartment. Ruby nodded, stepping aside and allowing her ex-boyfriend to enter the house. She lived there alone. Her grandmother, who raised the girl, died in a car accident 5 years ago. The girl had not yet gotten married and worked at the local library. However, the girl was reluctant to share the details of her personal life, as if she was not telling me something. "Did you come to visit your father's grave?" Ruby asked, pouring tea for the man. "What?" Oliver was baffled. "What grave?" Ruby looked at him in surprise, but then sadness appeared in her eyes. "Don't you know anything, Oliver? I buried your dad. 7 years ago, right after you disappeared, he had a heart attack." That evening they went to the cemetery where his son, kneeling at his father's grave, begged for forgiveness. But it was too late. Oliver decided to stay in his hometown for a while. He increasingly visited his ex-girlfriend. Sometimes he would stop by her workplace, saying he was passing by, or invite her for a walk or dinner together. Thus, the odd relationship revived, as if a withered plant were generously watered and the sun warmed it up, allowing it to bloom. The young people began to prepare for the wedding. "We have to visit your father's grave before the wedding," Ruby said when the young people were working on the guest list. So a couple of days later, Ruby and Oliver came to the cemetery to share the happy news with his father. When the young people approached the grave and the girls sat down to lay flowers, a little boy appeared next to them. It was already evening, and Ruby even shuddered when the pale boy, like a ghost, emerged from the mist, asking, "I am sorry, do you have any spare change? I'm hungry." The boy was a typical representative of the local beggars, thin, dirty, and sometimes wearing torn clothes. The cemetery was full of such characters, and the guard often chased away those who tried to collect candy or anything else from the graves. Oliver and Ruby exchanged glances, and the man searched his pockets for cash, eventually handing the child a couple of bills. "Aren't you afraid to wander here, boy?" asked Ruby, looking at the child with pain in her heart. He seemed to be around 6 years old. "I'm scared," the child honestly admitted, scratching his head and hiding the money in his pocket. "I wouldn't have come here, but getting a berating from my grandma is even scarier. Maybe the dead won't come out of the graves, but grandma will definitely beat me if I don't bring money. And the people in the cemetery are kind, unlike in town. They're sad here, that's why they give money, but in the city they chase me, they even hit me sometimes." "So you're beaten at home? Does your grandmother make you beg?" Ruby asked, feeling increasingly worried. "Yes," the boy nodded, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Where does your grandmother live?" "Oh, there in the village." The boy waved his hand. Ruby gasped. It was a half-hour drive to the village, and the boy had to walk even longer. It was getting darker and cooler outside. "Oliver, let's at least give him a ride home," Ruby asked her fiancé. He nodded, agreeing with her. They got the boy, who introduced himself as Louis, in the car and drove him home. Oliver lived in an old wooden house, and as soon as they parked next to the gate, an angry old woman came out of it. Despite her advanced age, she moved quickly and strongly. The old woman immediately started shouting at the little boy, scolding him for something, and not hesitating to use foul language. Then she even slapped him hard. "What are you doing, woman?" Oliver barked, approaching her. Meanwhile, Ruby ran up to the child, who just flinched and didn't even cry, because he was used to such treatment. "What's your business here? Why are you interfering where you're not wanted?" the old woman screeched. "Who are you anyway?" She looked at Oliver and Ruby, and then suddenly fell silent. Her eyes narrowed and she asked, "And you, girl, are you Lisa Hamilton's granddaughter?" "Answer." "Yes," Ruby nodded fearfully. "But my grandmother died 5 years ago." "Oh, you wretch. Take your freak away. Look at you. You and your grandmother sent that brat to me, and now you've come to teach me upbringing. You should have taken care of yourself, cuckoo. You gave birth, but you refused to raise a child, right?" Ruby listened in complete shock as the old woman's curses poured out of her mouth. Wait a minute, Oliver interrupted. We don't understand you. Can you explain what's going on? And she did. It turned out that when he ran away with his mother, Ruby found out she was pregnant, but she didn't get a chance to tell him since he disappeared. On the day she came to share the news, Oliver's father died. The girl buried him, but didn't know what to do next. Her grandmother urged her to terminate it, but Ruby couldn't get rid of her unborn child. She gave birth to a boy on time, but the baby turned out to be dead. At least that's what the doctors told Ruby. In reality, her grandmother paid someone to keep quiet and deceived her. Lisa Hamilton believed that they would not be able to raise the child, and that her granddaughter would ruin her life. She sent her granddaughter to study in another city, and the child lived with a cleaning worker meanwhile. The elderly woman wanted to send him to an orphanage eventually, but she didn't have time to settle things before she got hit by a car and died. Meanwhile, the cleaner took pity on the child and decided to keep him, but with time she realized it had been a mistake. She was laid off from work, but had to feed and clothe the child. It was difficult to raise him. There was not enough money and her health was failing. She became increasingly angry with the boy each day, considering him a burden. But she couldn't give him away, fearing that she would be prosecuted for that. It would have been difficult to believe her story if Oliver and Ruby did not take a new look at the boy. He turned out to be insanely similar to his parents. That evening they took Louis to their home. He was suspicious of adults, but he was happy to leave the old woman he used to consider as his grandmother. Ruby hoped that over time the boy would thaw, and she could compensate him with love for all the years that they had been apart. Tears streamed down Ruby's face and her heart ached with pity for this child. Perhaps your father brought him to us, Ruby mused, when the boy dressed in his new pajamas slept in their bed. Oliver remained silent, though he himself thought the same thing. Maybe his father could forgive him after all, and give him the best wedding present ever. 5 years have passed since then. The family's apartment was noisy as usual. Louis teased his 4-year-old sister, and threw a pillow at her older brother's laughter. Children, are you ready yet? Oliver asked, peeking into his son's room and shaking his head. Molly, don't strangle your brother. He still has a test to take today. Dad, why did you have to remind me? Groaned his son from under the pillow. Molly, squeeze harder. I don't want to go to school. But I want to go to school, the girl declared. You're thinking that way now, little piglet. The schoolboy snorted, emerging into the light of day. Oliver didn't notice his wife approaching as he watched the children. She hugged him around the waist, pressing close to her beloved. He smiled, kissing her on the head. Breakfast is on the table, Ruby said, looking lovingly at the mischievous children. Molly laughed again because Louis started tickling her. The laughter of children, the smell of coffee from the